Carla Jan Walker was born on January 31st of 1957 in Fort Worth, Texas. She was a 17-year-old cheerleader and student who was kidnapped out of her boyfriend's passenger seat on the 16th of February, 1974. Carla and her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy, were sitting and waiting for friends in his car in the parking lot of Brunswick Ridgely Bowl, after attending a Valentine's dance week at Western Hills High School when suddenly, the car door swung open and the two were attacked and assaulted by an unknown person who mistakenly dropped the magazine from his gun during the attack. While trying to fight off the bad guy, McCoy was knocked into unconsciousness with the back of a pistol. When he woke up later, he discovered Carla was gone, and the last thing he remembered was her shouting, "Rodney, go get my dad." McCoy then went to Carla's house to tell her parents what had transpired. They called the police, who searched the area where she had been kidnapped. Her purse and the magazine clip the attacker left behind were the only items recovered in the parking lot. Several days later, on February 20th, 1974, Carla's body was found in a drainage culvert at Benbrook Lake. According to autopsy results, she had been alive for 2 days after her abduction, and she had also been beaten, raped, injected with morphine, tortured, and strangled to death. The police were said to have quite a number of suspects on their list during the first phase of investigation. One man named Glenn Samuel McCurley was questioned shortly after Carla's murder in 1974 because the gun magazine found in the parking lot of the bowling alley was tied to him. Apparently, he had recently purchased a pistol that used the same magazine as the one found on the crime scene. However, McCurley told investigators that his gun was stolen from his truck. After taking and passing a polygraph test, he was let off the hook. At this point, there was nothing tying him to the murder. The police, who desperately wanted answers, had obtained evidence of semen and other bodily fluids from the crime scene. They had also preserved Carla's clothing for further investigation, but due to lack of advanced technology in the 1970s, the killer could not be identified. Hence, the murder remained a cold case for 46 years until in September 2020, when the police got DNA samples from the trash can outside McCurley's home. After confirming that the samples matched the DNA evidence gotten from the crime scene in 1974, investigators returned to McCurley's home, where he invited them in for a talk. He repeated the same story he told the police in 1974. He claimed not to have killed anyone and said he never knew Carla Jan Walker. Investigators then asked him for a DNA sample, to which he agreed and signed a consent form. They took 2 chick swabs and sent them alongside with Carla's clothing for analysis. They were sent to Othram Inc., a lab that specializes in advanced testing of small and degraded DNA. They ended up developing a full DNA profile of the perpetrator. 6 days later, the swabs gotten from McCurley matched the DNA found on Carla's bra. This was enough to arrest and charge McCurley with capital murder. In August 2021, McCurley started his trial. The evidence presented in court included the pistol he had claimed was stolen in 1974. The pistol was found carefully hidden inside his home. By the 3rd day of his trial, McCurley pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. He is currently imprisoned in Gibb Lewis Unit and will be eligible for parole on the 21st of March 2029. As of the time of making this video, he still maintains his innocence. He once told a reporter that he pled guilty because he had had enough hounding. Finally arrested, Jim Walker, Carla's younger brother, is glad that the family eventually has a face to the gruesome murder of his sister. Jim, who became a police officer nearly 45 years ago after his sister was killed, said their parents had both died without seeing the killer, but he was able to fulfill the pledge he made to his mother.
46 years, 7 months, and 5 days, or 17,053 days ago, Carla was abducted. I would like to sit here and tell you, no, I never gave up hope. But there were really dark times, and watching the pain my mom went through. Sorry, guys. But I can tell you, this whole case being resolved is a thank you God moment. I know people don't like to hear that quite often, but it is.
When Etan Patz disappeared on his way to school, his family were unaware of what had happened to him until after school hours were over and he never returned home. The search for Etan Patz began, and parents around New York became alarmed in such a way that they started changing the way many of them watched over their children. Now, almost 40 decades later, a man has been identified as the perpetrator. Hello, and welcome to Mystery Detective. Please support my channel by subscribing and hitting the bell icon for more crime cases. Ethan Khalil Patz was born on October 9, 1972 to Julie and Stanley Patz in Manhattan, New York. He was the middle child. He had an elder sister and a younger brother. At the time of Etan's disappearance, he and his family lived in the Soho neighborhood of Lower Manhattan. Soho is an acronym for South of Houston Street, a name that was first used by renowned developer Chester Rapkin in 1962. Today, South of Houston Street is famous for its boutiques, art galleries, and loft living spaces. Famous celebrities like Dakota Fanning, Alicia Keys, Daniel Craig, John Legend, Justin Timberlake, and Samuel L. Jackson are known to reside or have resided there. The neighborhood might be safe for habitation now, but it wasn't always like that in the 1970s. It was much rougher. The overall appearance of New York City was substantially different back then than it is today. The city had been tainted by a financial crisis from which many believed it would never fully recover. There were high unemployment rates, a significant flight to the suburbs, and attacks on the subway. Times Square was known for its prostitutes and pimps, and Central Park was feared for robbery and rape. Abandoned buildings were occupied by drug dealers and the homeless. Tourists were not left out of attacks and robbery back then. The Council of Public Safety, composed of police, firefighters, and other unions, published a pamphlet titled "Welcome to Fear City" with a large skull on the cover. The pamphlet advised tourists not to go outside after 6 o'clock, not go out of Midtown. They must make a taxi call before leaving their hotels. They should never take a subway ride, and they should leave no belongings in the hotel safe. At the time, when a visitor or tourist come to New York and see such pamphlet, they would undoubtedly turn around and leave. Consider what Etan Patz's neighborhood may have looked like then. Boarded up buildings, shadowy alleys, no security cameras, and no cell phones. The morning of May 25, 1979, which appeared to have been a Friday, the final day of school before the Memorial Day holiday, was a chaotic one in the Patz household. Julie Patz, Etan's mother, who operated a daycare in their home, had her hands full that morning. She had two 2-year-olds to care for, her younger son and another kid who had spent the night. Also, Etan's older sister had resisted getting out of bed. Etan, on the other hand, woke up with a positive energy and was eager to start his day. According to Julie Patz, Etan had been attempting to be more independent, and in the midst of the chaos that morning, he saw an opportunity. He told his mom to allow him walk to school by himself. His mom recalled he pleaded, saying, "It's fine. Mom, "I can do it." With some hesitation, Julie accepted. He then crammed his favorite toy cars into his tote bag, which was given to him by a friend's mother. Before leaving home, Eaton donned his favorite headgear, an Eastern Airlines cap, after which his mother led him outside. He reportedly left with a $1 note in hand because he intended to get a soda on the way to school. It was the last time Julie, his mother, saw him. When Eaton didn't return home that afternoon, she called around and discovered he hadn't made it to his bus or school. Julie claimed that she was shocked when she learned that Eaton was missing. "My legs started giving out," she said. Soon, the Pat's family house had been transformed into a command post where the press, volunteers, and police investigators had gathered. Eaton's photograph was extensively publicized, appearing on television newscasts and the front pages of the city's newspapers. The city was covered in missing posters that featured an image of his hair poking out from under a cap. He was reportedly the first missing kid to appear on a milk container. The way he vanished, the ensuing search, and the anxiety it caused engulfed Lower Manhattan. Residents recalled police officers going from door to door, showing his photos and questioning people about where he could possibly be. Eaton's disappearance caused a huge stir even outside his neighborhood. President Ronald Reagan declared May 25, the day of his disappearance, to be National Missing Children's Day, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was founded in 1984, in part as a result of his disappearance. His case received a lot of attention, but there were no solutions. Numerous theories were put up, and a number of suspects came to light, including Jose Ramos, a man who'd been convicted of abusing children and who the police had been hunting for years. Jose Ramos was romantically involved with a woman who had once been hired to accompany Etan home from school. As time went on, investigation refocused interest. Officials had searched the basement of a Lower Manhattan building for 8 hours in the year 2000. That building was where Ramos had previously resided. Investigators discovered pieces of bones, but it turned out that they belonged to animals. In the year 2012, after authorities discovered that a man by the name of Othniel Miller had laid a concrete floor soon after Etan vanished, they launched a search and dug up his workshop. Othniel Miller was an handyman who reportedly knew Eaton Patz. Etan often visited him at his workshop. In fact, the $1 note that Etan carried the morning he was last seen was given to him by Othniel Miller. However, the search, which sparked a fresh round of news media attention, failed to find Etan's remains. But after a few weeks passed, a guy from New Jersey named Josie Lopez got in touch with the authorities and said that he thought his brother-in-law, Pedro Hernandez, might have something to do with Etan Part's abduction. Back then, on May 25, 1979, Pedro Hernandez was an 18-year-old high school dropout who had recently relocated to Manhattan from Camden, New Jersey. He worked as a stock clerk in a bodega near Etan Pat's bus stop on West Broadway and Prince Street. Shortly after Etan vanished, perhaps within days, Pedro Hernandez went back to New Jersey and took a job in a clothing factory there. Not long, he suddenly began telling people that he had killed a child in New York City. At a spiritual retreat, he confided in an elder from his church group and confessed before a prayer group, breaking down in tears. He also confessed to his previous wife before they got married. However, their testimony indicated that the accounts varied. Pedro Hernandez's childhood friend thought he had killed a black child. His former wife, after hearing Muchacho, thought he had killed a teenage boy. Investigators questioned Pedro Hernandez after his brother-in-law dialed 911. The police claimed that after spending many hours with the detectives, Pedro gave in. He claimed that he had asked Etan Patz if he wanted a soda in order to entice him down the bodega's basement. The little boy, who initially intended to buy a soda with his $1 bill, innocently followed him and was immediately attacked. In a segment of the interview that was captured on camera, Pedro Hernandez said to the detectives, "I grabbed him by the neck and I started to choke him." He refrained from claiming that he had killed Etan. explaining that the little boy was still alive when he had placed him in a plastic bag and then placed the bag inside of a box, which he then discarded about a block away. Pedro Hernandez's words have served as the foundation of the prosecution's case against him. Prosecutors have had little to work with in the absence of Etten's remains or any crime scene from which they could gather evidence. In addition to presenting the testimony of the investigators and the people he had confessed to decades before, they also played video recordings of the interviews Pedro Hernandez made to the police shortly before his arrest. The main focus of Pedro Hernandez's defense has been to cast doubt on his credibility. His attorneys contend that 56-year-old Pedro Hernandez has low intelligence as well as a personality condition that impairs his ability to discriminate between truth and fiction. Therefore, they claim, just because he admitted to what he thought he had done does not indicate he actually did it. Becky Hernandez, Pedro Hernandez's youngest child, testified about her father's strange conduct, including his claims of seeing angels and devils, watering a dead tree limb to make it grow, and how she would catch him talking to himself. The defense, however, claimed that the initial suspect, Jose Ramos, the child molester who had been found guilty, had the chance and the incentive to have been accountable for Etten Patz's disappearance. Members of the jury were in doubts after hearing their arguments. There was a deadlocked jury after 18 days of deliberations. In 2015, the judge declared a mistrial. Only one member of the panel who didn't think Pedro Hernandez was guilty held out. However, following a 4-month trial on February 14, 2017, Pedro Hernandez was found guilty of murder and kidnapping. He was then sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Why do you think Pedro Hernandez committed such evil atrocity? Was he truly possessed by a demon? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments.
Fawn Cox was 16 years old when she was raped, strangled, and eventually killed in her bedroom on the 26th of July 1989. Fawn was a junior at Northeast High School and had been working as a cashier at Worlds of Fun, a Kansas City amusement park, until 11 p.m. that evening when her mother, Beverly, had picked her up and brought her home. Her family said she had gone straight to bed due to how exhausted she was. Fawn's younger sisters Amber and Felisa would often sleep upstairs with her, but on the night she was murdered, she was the only one in the room upstairs. While she was sleeping, someone snuck into the house through an upstairs window and raped and strangled her in her bed. There were semen stains left behind on the bed. By the next morning, when Fawn's alarm went off at the usual 9:30 a.m. to wake her up for work and she didn't turn it off, her mother and sister came upstairs to check up on her, only to discover that she was still in bed but lying dead. Her family claimed to have not heard anything from downstairs. They said the sound of their loud air conditioner must have drowned out any noise coming from upstairs during the attack. Felisa Cox mentioned in an interview that, though the family dog got agitated at a point during the night of her sister's murder, but they attributed it to the dog being pregnant. Fawn, who was said to have just gotten her learner's permit 3 days before her murder, was a church lover. She attended church regularly with her family, and she loved Amy Grant music. When she died, her father, John, took comfort in the family's faith. The murder of Fawn shook the whole of Kansas City. In August of that year, 3 teenagers were apprehended regarding her murder, but they were later released when DNA tests failed to conclusively link them to the crime. The police stayed on Fawn's case. They followed every lead but got nowhere. The community and the family of Fawn Cox also refused to give up. Anytime there is an advancement in DNA testing, they would make sure the police used it in Fawn's case. At a point, the police were frustrated when a search of Combined DNA Index System, a database containing the DNA of every felon in the United States, failed to find a match. Fawn's family raised money and spoke to the media. They bought billboards that went up in Kansas City. They fought for years to get advanced DNA techniques used on the case. They held fundraisers, even offering to pay for it themselves, as the Kansas City police could not afford it. Eventually, the FBI paid for a genealogy DNA testing, and on the 11th of November 2020, after narrowing down their list of suspects, the police finally revealed Donald Cox Jr., Fawn's cousin, who was 5 years older than her, as the murderer. Unfortunately, justice could not be truly served as he had died of a drug overdose in 2006. To further prove that Donald Cox Jr. was the murderer they had wanted for decades, the investigators who had worked on Donald's death investigation had retained his blood sample during his case because they had sensed foul play in the circumstances surrounding his death. They then compared DNA from the blood sample with a DNA profile from the bodily fluids recovered from Fawn's bedroom in 1989 and discovered a match. Fawn's parents, who now have closure to the case, were sad but relieved. They said they had sometimes wondered if Donald had killed her. It turned out that their suspicion was right all along.
There's closure. The answers aren't always what we were asking for, but there's closure.
The fact that it's someone that you know well and it's actually a relative, how is the family dealing with that?
I think we're doing okay. We're doing okay. Just having answers helps.
Around 5:30 p.m. on the 23rd of August 1972, 20 years old Jody Loomis was found by a couple who were driving up a dark dirt track off Penny Creek Road in Snohomish County, Washington. The couple had planned to go target shooting when they were hindered by a fallen tree which blocked their path as they drove up the dirt road. They then got out to move the tree aside, but were shocked to find a woman lying there conscious and dying from a gunshot wound to the head. Jody Loomis laid in the woods half naked, in her panties, high socks, and dark waffle stomper-style boots which, according to a source, she borrowed from her 12-year-old sister. Jody had been shot above her right ear. Though still alive, she was unable to speak to the couple who raced her to Stevens Hospital. Unfortunately, it was too late to revive her as she was pronounced dead upon arrival. April 23rd of 1972 appeared to have been a warm Wednesday afternoon when Jody Loomis decided to ride her white 10-speed bicycle to visit her horse at a stable 6 miles away. Dressed in a crop top, jeans, and a waffle stomper boots, Jody headed out without her parents. Usually, her parents drove her to the horse stable and dropped her off, and the day she was raped and killed was the first time she had gone to the stable on her own. Her death remained unsolved for years, haunting both her family and investigators. Both parties never gave up. The police diligently pursued the case. At a point, they passed out playing cards in jails hoping someone would come forward with information, but nothing was found. The case quickly turned cold, but the investigators and the family of Jody still had a glimmer of hope. The case was later reopened in 2008, where the evidence gotten from the crime scene was taken to a crime lab. A DNA sample was gotten from the small semen stain on Jody Loomis' boots, but the sample did not match any of the male suspects on the investigators' list. The case went cold for another decade until investigators finally had a breakthrough in 2018. The process of genetic genealogy was used by the forensics, who uploaded the genetic profile onto public ancestry websites to try to narrow down possible suspects. This DNA technique led the Washington state investigators to pinpoint Terrence Miller as a likely suspect. Miller was a retired heavy equipment operator who ran a ceramics shop with his wife in Edmonds, Washington, about 17 miles from where Jody was murdered. The police then put Miller under surveillance and eventually obtained his DNA from a coffee cup, which he had thrown out at a casino. According to investigators, the DNA sample from the coffee cup was an exact match to the DNA sample found on Jody Loomis's boot. According to reports, Terrence Miller had been accused at least 5 times with sex crimes in the 1960s. In 2019, Snohomish County Sheriff's Department arrested and charged him with first-degree murder. However, hours before Miller would be convicted by a jury, he committed suicide. Nonetheless, 3 hours after sheriff's deputies found him dead in his house, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder.